It's great to be joined today by Peter Frase, who's an editor at Jacobin Magazine and author of the forthcoming book, For Futures from Verso Press. This is such an interesting topic, Peter. You know, we've been talking about the possibilities of post-workism, the post-work society, including as a result of automation and technological unemployment. Let's sort of go backwards first, if we can. Set up for us, when did we sort of begin the status quo that many of us know today of sort of wage labor and working full time as we know it as the de facto way to sort of make a living or to live one's life? How old is that paradigm?
Well, it varies, of course, in different places. I think certainly in the rich countries, we sort of trace it back to the Industrial Revolution and the 19th century, and then the 20th century kind of generalized it across more and more of the population that, you didn't have any other way to make a living. People weren't, living their own sort of living on their growing their own food or living independently. You had to go out and get a job in order to earn money, in order to buy the goods that were required, in order to pay your rent, all of that sort of thing. You know, over the years throughout the 20th century, more and more people were sort of drawn into that way of living until now it's sort of considered the only way. And for most people, it is the only way that it's possible to live.
And let's talk a little bit about first the sort of pros hypothetically of a post-work society. If we can imagine a situation where humans are sort of no longer in the situation where the default need is for them to be working full time, providing a service or manufacturing a product or whatever the case may be. What are the sort of positive possibilities that are presented in such a society? What opportunities are there that would be good as we might describe them?
Well, the basic idea is that time is sort of the ultimate form of wealth. It's the ultimate good, is to have time for ourselves to do what we want when we are neither working for someone else nor sort of desperately hustling for survival. And when you look at it, this is, on a material basis, the wealthiest human civilization that has ever existed. We have the ability to provide a decent standard of living for people without forcing them to spend most of their waking hours doing something that they might rather not be doing or working for someone else. And what people do with their time, it's an open question. It could be writing poetry, it could be, growing vegetables, it could be raising children, it could be writing software. Ultimately, I think, at least where I come from, the idea here is that we have a society that is able to make truly free time available to people on a much wider basis than it currently is. And it's simply that our economic and political institutions don't allow that.
One of the big concerns whenever we talk about what may be a shifting paradigm with regard to work and post-workism is the idea that all of a sudden we will have increased poverty. We will have unemployment. People won't be able to get jobs because so many jobs will be done by machines. That sort of way of thinking seems to me rooted in a sort of attachment to the status quo of working full time in order to have a life or make a living. Is it going to be a challenge to first separate ourselves from that sort of reflexive idea if we are to pursue what seems to be coming increasingly in a productive way? Are people married to that idea so that they often can't even really consider what things would be like?
I don't know that it's necessarily that people can't consider it. I think it's people rightly fear that the potential benefits of the technologies that we have, of the social structure that we have, the potential benefits are not going to accrue to you if you are simply broke and unemployed.
Hmm.
Right? It might, in principle, be possible to liberate people from work, but if what in practice happens is that a few people own the robots and get rich, and the rest of us are simply desperate, then yeah, no, that's not better than the old system of you just get a job and a wage and you survive. Right? I mean, these are anxieties that go back to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, to, the folk tale of John Henry, the steel driving man, who is, a railroad worker who's has to race against the steam powered hammer and beats the steam powered hammer and then drops dead. That's the sort of, that kind of competition against the machine rather than the machine liberating us from labor is is an anxiety that goes back a long ways, and it's rooted in a very sensible anxiety that we aren't, without a certain political struggle, we aren't going to get the potential benefits we could get.
Yeah, I mean, the ideas of a post-work society have been explored in, in science fiction for a long time. Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke rings a bell to me. I believe that was written in the early 1950s. You talk about in your upcoming book about this essay written by John Maynard Keynes, where he said that humans will have this question of how do we use our time when economic concerns may be resolved? What exactly do we do? I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Well, and in some ways, that's exactly right. Keynes, he wrote this essay called "Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren" back in the 30s, and that was a time in which people like him, mainstream economists, mainstream thinkers, sort of believed that we were going to all be working less and less, because at that time that had been the tendency. You had in the 19th century workers who had fought to get the 10-hour day. And then after that, they fought to get the 8-hour day. And we were talking in the 30s about the 35 or the 30-hour week. So this idea that we would have more and more time, and that our future problem was going to be to figure out what to do with that time, that's just seemed like common sense to someone like Keynes. And the thing is that what happened is that we didn't keep on that path. We got stuck at working 40, or for a lot of people more than 40 hours a week. And so what I would consider to be the better problem of what do we do with our free time never arose.
I'd be curious how, for example, the narrative that often exists now is, well, you've got to get a good job, and in order to do that, you have to go to college, and in order to get into college, you have to do well in high school, and in order to do well in high school, you should really build up your education and study habits in middle school and in elementary school. How would a post-work society change the entire path of education?
Well, I think it would in some ways be getting back to the idea that education is not narrowly focused on preparing you for a job. I think recently that's become the sort of mantra, is that education is just, all it is just preparing you for a job, even though, people get out of college, and in fact, even if you get an engineering degree, it turns out that there aren't enough jobs for the people with those degrees. That idea, that narrow idea of education as just preparing you for a job is a failure in practice. But the broader idea of education, of equipping you with the tools to live a rich life, meaning, the broader ideal of sort of liberal education, that education equips you to be able to appreciate life and to be able to go through society in a richer way, that is something that goes far beyond the idea of work. And I think we can go back to that and really have a deeper appreciation of the importance of education if we get away from this idea that it's just narrowly job training.
Is your sense that this transition to a sort of post-work society is inevitable?
I don't think it's inevitable. I think it is ultimately a political question. There are a lot of different ways we can go. My book goes into this idea that we have the material ability to liberate people from work. Whether we do depends on a political struggle. Right now, the wealth of society is concentrated in very few hands, and we could easily have a society in which we all continue to work jobs that don't really need to exist in order to enrich others. We could easily live in a society where a lot of us simply become superfluous, and we become, marginal slum dwellers, essentially, because we don't have access to social wealth. Or we could live in a truly post-work society in which we are all able to enjoy free time, enjoy leisure time, and access the benefits that our society potentially can make available.
And what's your sense of the transitional period that would be in place? Is that going to be really the most complex period, the figuring out how to get from A to B?
Yes, I think so, and I think that's the period we are currently in.
Hmm.
When you look at all of the struggles that we are currently seeing around, the conversations we're having about income inequality, about the future of work, about the 99% and the 1%, that's because we are in that transition right now, and we are trying to figure out how to navigate it.
I'll remind you that the forthcoming book is For Futures from Verso Press. We've been speaking with the book's author, Peter Frase, who's also an editor at Jacobin Magazine. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.